The podcast you are about to listen to is not a medical podcast, nor is it designed to diagnose a condition. While there are medical experts on the show, any questions regarding medical care or concern should be directed to a primary care physician.
The team at INVAX is dedicated to delivering new, personalized immunotherapy approaches to improve outcomes for people living with glioblastoma and other solid tumors. Leveraging decades of validated research and technologies, INVAX's unique platform is designed to capture a tumor's full antigen signature and use it to stimulate a patient's immune system against remaining tumor cells. INVAX is currently recruiting for a randomized Phase 2b clinical trial of IGV-001 in newly diagnosed glioblastoma patients. Learn more about this Phase 2b trial at invax.com or clinicaltrials.gov. INVAX, advancing a new approach to personalized cancer immunotherapy. Hey, it's your friend Shannon Trapphagen, and welcome to the Game On Glio podcast. Here we tell the stories of brain cancer and tumor warriors, clinicians, medical experts, and those in the grief and loss community. Thanks to all of you for making our podcast one of the most popular podcasts globally. If you enjoy our show, please consider writing a review. Also share us with a friend and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and our website.
Season 4 of the Game On Glio podcast is sponsored by GT MedTech and Gametile Therapy. Learn more at gtmedtech.com. Season 4 is also sponsored by INVAX, personalized whole tumor derived immunotherapy. Learn more at invax.com. This episode is sponsored by Roon and the Roon app, your trusted guide for health conditions such as glioblastoma. Learn more at roon.com.
Life is about timing, and timing is everything in love and in loss. This quote always struck me as an odd contradiction, yet I get its meaning. Timing is everything, and everything to its time. But there is no perfect time, hence the contradiction. So how do we reconcile being okay with life's timing? I think it really comes down to being a passenger in our own car. Someone else is driving, yet we don't know who that someone is and we can't see them. But we're a passenger watching ourselves head towards a destination we know nothing about. That's what timing is. It's not something that's in our control. It's not something we can see. We just have to trust it. And when we lean into love, we are letting ourselves be vulnerable and open and allowing the timing to play out. Yet when someone dies, we hate that we have no control. And we get confused by life's timing. Because when someone dies, when we suffer loss, there is no perfect time for it. This is life's greatest lesson to us. To let go of the steering wheel and let life drive. This season on Game On Glio, we're shaking things up a little. We have some amazing brain cancer stories and resource stories, but we're also sharing some inspirational second chance love stories. Because this show, above anything else, is about empowering ourselves to embrace the stickiness of life, to let go of the steering wheel and let the universe, life, drive us forward, and to show each other the different colors, the different aspects, the different versions of life through others' eyes. As we recognize Brain Cancer Awareness Month, let's also acknowledge the beauty of timing and of the gift that life gives us, love. Our upcoming guests, the creators of the Roon app, share this sentiment and empower others through education and resources. They sit down with us next after a brief word from one of our sponsors. Imagine waking up from brain tumor removal surgery knowing that your radiation treatment is already underway. That's how Gametile therapy works. At the end of brain tumor removal surgery, the neurosurgeon implants the tiny gametiles where the tumor is most likely to return. So instead of waiting to start daily standard radiation treatments that go for weeks, you get a head start against the tumor cells and get back to your life sooner. For operable brain tumors of all types, including glioblastomas, brain metastases, and meningiomas, GammaTile therapy is a one-time targeted radiation treatment with fewer side effects and far less chance of hair loss than external radiation. GammaTile therapy is FDA-cleared radiation therapy for patients with newly diagnosed malignant brain tumors and recurrent brain tumors. GammaTile therapy is tough on tumors and easier on patients and caregivers. Learn more at gammatile.com. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us here on the Game On Glio podcast. I am thrilled to bring into our studio space for the Game On Glio podcast Rohan Ramakrishna, who is a brain tumor neurosurgeon at Vail Cornell. And if I'm saying that wrong, correct me. And he's the co-founder of Roon, which is an online app and creative space built with the mission of reimagining online health and wellness. He has dedicated his entire career to helping families navigating brain tumors and to achieve better outcomes. We also have with us Vikram Bhaskaran, who is the CEO and co-founder of Roon. He has a deep background in consumer technology and has spent a great part of his career as a senior executive at Pinterest before moving over to Roon. Together, they joined forces to create the best place on the web for people navigating health and disease issues. And the topics, especially on this app, they really focus, it's going to expand out, but they really do focus on GBM, ALS, and dementia, which are all really heavy diseases that are plaguing a lot of individuals right now. So welcome, both of you, to the show. I am so thrilled to have you guys here with us, kicking off Brain Cancer Awareness Month.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So let's dive right in. Let's start with the creation of Roon. How did this come to be? I mean, what inspired you guys to come up with this? Tell us a little bit about what it is. And did you guys know each other beforehand? Like, how did you guys partner together for this? Give us some of the background.
Yeah, I can kick off. Firstly, really excited to be here today. I'll start with my journey and then Rohan will tease out his part. But for me, I was at Pinterest for many years in the tech world. And in 2012, my father was diagnosed with ALS, which is a serious neurodegenerative condition. He was in India at the time. And I did what most families do, which is, you spend tons of time on the internet trying to figure out what condition this is. We had so many questions. And because he was in India, we had very limited access to experts. There are 2,500 neurologists in India, which is the number of neurologists in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
We found, and I found especially as a caregiver, just kind of the state of the internet to be quite disappointing, right? You go to Dr. Google and you get into these rabbit holes of misinformation and disinformation, and it's extremely anxiety inducing. And then you go into online communities and, while they're great, Facebook groups, etc., they're also just rife with misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I just asked a very simple kind of provocative question, which was, can we build a place where people in the medical world felt comfortable sending you to before and after a clinic visit, and where we actually felt proud of the internet and, a place where we could really extend the access of experts in the field. And so that was the genesis of Roon.
Mm-hmm.
Roon is named after my father. It's a nod to him. His name was Roon. Roon backwards is Noor, which in Arabic is light in a time of darkness.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
So that was my story. And, I was, Rohan and I have known each other for years. He had very similar insights through the perspective of a neurosurgeon. Go ahead, Rohan.
Yeah. So again, thanks for having us. As a brain tumor surgeon at Weill Cornell in New York for the last more than a decade, one of the things that kept creeping up in the office was just how much patients and families were asking for additional help, additional support, additional resources beyond that, which we could provide in the office. And what do we do as doctors or as health institutions when you show up as a patient? There'll be some kind of generic, not so useful pamphlet or PDF that we give families. Some of these PDFs, as you know, Shannon, can be hundreds of pages long.
Yeah.
When you're diagnosed or dealing with a brain tumor, given all this homework to read from the office, much of which may not even be that useful, seems like it's missing the mark. On top of that, patients were telling me they were going to Google all the time, as Vikram mentioned, Facebook groups, Reddit groups, and really coming out of those experiences, not empowered, but more anxious and more afraid. Part of the reason for that is the information there is just not necessarily credible. You don't know how to distinguish good quality information from misinformation or disinformation.
Right.
As Vikram said, how could we do better? How could we create a system where experts broadly defined, so not just doctors, but everyone that can lend expertise
Mm-hmm.
in a brain tumor journey, social workers, psychologists, mental health experts, anyone that can really help you and come together to really create a very digestible platform where you can find the information you need quickly, experience it, learn from it, and then hopefully be more empowered on your healthcare journey. As Vikram said, we've known each other for years. We've been both dealing with this particular set of issues, and we're thinking about how we could address them. We were stuck together nearby during the pandemic, and we just got to talking, and then Roon was born.
And this is how all great creative technologies and apps and ideas and stories, this is how they come about. In creating Roon, I mean, let's be real, it's an app, it's IT, it's technology. It's great to get into the space, but it's also really difficult to develop. So what did it look like when you guys started Roon? I mean, how, like, the incubator process and kind of getting it off the ground? I mean, what did that look like, and how did you guys navigate that? Did you guys have to go out and look for investors, or was this something where you guys had certain companies that were willing to back the development of it right away? Kind of walk us through that journey, because it's an amazing platform. And for anybody, I will have the information at the end for anybody who wants to go and to utilize it. It's a beautiful platform and it's fairly flawless, but it takes a lot of work to put that together.
Creating anything new, there's a lot of ups and downs and twists and turns and late nights debating, every little aspect of what we should put out into the world. I will say that, initially when we started, our mental model was like medical masterclass. We said, hey, there's a class of doctors who are really good teachers. And we saw many of those emerge during the pandemic, all the way from Dr. Fauci, Sanjay Gupta, just people who went to social media and started teaching and educating and debunking myths, especially during COVID. And so our first idea was like, how cool would it be if we had, doctors teaching, and masterclass was the model. And so our first product was really this masterclass for medicine, focused on people navigating glioblastoma. We found two really interesting things. The first thing we found was actually people loved the humanity of just seeing a doctor like Rohan look into a camera and answer questions. But what people didn't appreciate and like was the length, right? So I think busy caregivers who are already time famished, navigating a really hard condition, you don't want to sit through a lecture.
Yep.
You don't want to sit through, 5 hours of content, right? This is not fun. Like, unlike Netflix or TikTok, there's nothing fun about medical content. And so we pivoted to really this short form video based Q&A platform, because the real insight we had was like doctors are answering questions all day and patients really want answers. 7% of Google is actually people searching for answers to questions. And so, the early days was hard because we created this beautiful thing and we were so proud of this medical masterclass, but we had to go back to the drawing board and rebuild it. In terms of your question, and I think the thing that people love today is just the short answers in a digestible format. If you go to roon.com, you'll see it. Raising capital was definitely hard, but I think this is one of those ideas that I feel its time has come, right? We saw during the pandemic the rise of people basically teaching. As I said, everyone's been looking for someone to really go after Google, and Dr. Google has sort of become the joke, right? Don't go to Dr. Google is what every doctor says. And WebMD is great, but they've been around for decades, and most of the content there is very superficial.
I was just going to say the same thing, that Dr. Google has replaced what WebMD used to be seen as.
Exactly, yeah. So when we were raising capital, it was fascinating because, I came at this through ALS, Rohan through neurosurgery and glioblastoma, but every single investor we talked to had a version of this problem. Everyone had a relative, someone that was navigating other conditions, and it was this universal head nod from our investors that, hey, like, we spend billions of dollars on shopping apps and better versions of media companies, but then Silicon Valley as an industry, we all go home, and when a loved one is going through something hard, we're ashamed of the internet. I think that was really kind of a galvanizing force, which was just like, as technologists, how could we do better? And it's time to really reimagine what the internet can look like for us as a species, just to be, more supported with this tool that has so much of value outside of health.
It's so amazing that you put some attention on that, because I think the one thing that everybody globally learned throughout the pandemic was that there were a lot of creative versions and formats of storytelling that came out of the pandemic, different ways of using different platforms to navigate and create and to really give information to each other, whether it was from a colleague to a colleague, or as you were saying, like Dr. Gupta, who I've seen some of his YouTube videos. People started getting inspired to find a new way to navigate and disseminate information. And that's exactly what Roon is. That it was how I created the Game On Glio podcast. At the time, nobody else was doing a podcast about brain cancer stories and education and advocacy. I was the first one to do that in a storytelling platform that wasn't medically driven from colleague to colleague. And now we've got these other great podcasts, and all of these people are finding ways to disseminate and share information. And it's so vitally important to people who really need the information without being able to turn to Google or even clinicaltrials.gov.
Yeah.
I have so many patients that reach out and they're like, can you please help us navigate away from this and find out where we can get, it's really heavy to deal with those. You guys have this set up in a way where, again, it's short form answers. It's digestible pieces of information that are a few minutes, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes at most. You have caregiver stories, you have patient stories, you have medical experts on the show. Tell us a little bit, what makes a good medical expert? How do you gather these stories? How do you kind of vet who you're going to have, whether it's a caregiver or patient or expert? How do you decide what's going to be best served for the platform?
Like your podcast, we're not just a technology company. The thing we use technology for is to highlight, amplify, and scale amazing expert voices that aren't just experts, but really empathic, articulate individuals that are here to help you, who have really spent their lives in the trenches learning these hard-won insights that shouldn't be a secret in Boston or New York City, right? They should be applied to really anybody that needs it all across the world. And so we go and find people who are incredible educators, that live at that intersection of being incredible educators plus being expert clinicians on the expert side. And we bring them on the app and we ask them questions in the short form video-based Q&A format. And then with the patients and caregivers, we get introduced to people who have been through the journey, across all of our conditions, who want to share, again, that hard-won expertise. As a caregiver, you're joining that club that you never wanted to join. As people go through that, we find that so many just want to share these incredible practical tips and tricks, or just even share their story, because sharing their story can be a catharsis in and of itself.
Right.
To be able to talk about what you've been through and share that with people. So we vet everyone that's on the service before they are able to publish any content with us. For all the medical content that we have, it goes through a series of medical reviews prior to being published. But what makes it easy is that we only draw from the best and brightest within any of the fields that we go after. And so the information there is really incredible and top notch, and it keeps getting updated. So one of the things we do is we always make sure that for questions that require updating, for example, what's the result of this phase 1 clinical trial, we can come back to it and update it as new results come out. So we're really building a dynamic ecosystem where you get credible information, personalized information, and then curated and contextualized information. Because as anyone that's gone down the Dr. Google rabbit hole can attest, the information is neither empathic or contextualized. And so what we're trying to do is say, hey, you've searched for clinical trials. Do you know what a clinical trial is? Do you know what questions to ask when you're thinking about a clinical trial? We talk about the fears that people have when it comes to clinical trials, about medical experimentation and things like that. We go through all the hard questions that you may be afraid to ask your physician or your hospital around your medical journey. So I think that part of it has been a resounding success from the standpoint of what people tell us about the app.
That's really important. Vikram, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, one thing to add there is every platform kind of births a new set of creators, right? So when I was at Pinterest, it was people with really good taste who were showcasing their taste. Early Twitter was journalists, TikTok, people who could dance and do music. What we found is in medicine, most of the best communicators are not on TikTok and Instagram because, if you're the chief of neurology at Harvard, it's exhausting to probably build a social media following, but you're doing it in that one-to-one clinical setting. And so to your earlier question of who are these people, what's most interesting about Roon is most of the people on Roon, they're just incredible teachers, as Rohan said, but all of the other platforms are kind of too much work or just not built for medicine and science. And so I think one of the things we're really excited about is really this new class of medical educator that is doing it for the first time at scale on the platform, where you would have otherwise only been able to access them at, let's say, an academic medical hospital like Weill Cornell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's been really interesting about the type of person that's attracted to Roon.
And I think that that's a trend that we're seeing a lot more of, especially within the medical setting and the medical community. It's something that I have put a lot of emphasis on when I've had experts on the show. I vet everybody before they come on. And what I have found, what I see in the trend is that, especially with medical experts, we're seeing more and more of these modern communicators, I guess is the best way to put it, among the medical community. And those are the people that I want to tap into, that I want our listeners, that I want patients and caregivers to have access to. And that's exactly what Roon is doing. It's taking these modern communicators, these medical experts who are just so good at disseminating and distilling down very precise and technical information that can really be above everybody's heads, and really pulling that down into information, bite-sized pieces of information that really helps patients and caregivers understand and navigate what's going to be ahead for them, and find the best options and the best resources. It all seems to come back to communication. It really is all about healthy communication. And what does that look like when you're trying to get really important information out to people, especially when you're talking about diseases like ALS and brain cancer? They're very brutal diseases.
Mm-hmm.
This is the space that Roon creates. And you guys each seem to be tapped into the community to be able to find these individuals. When it comes to medical experts, I mean, obviously, Rohan, you're in the neurosurgery field and the brain cancer space, so you're able to pull from a lot of individuals. But do you guys ever have to hunt, to kind of go find people or figure out who's going to come on as a medical expert? Or do you have like others that say, hey, this is a good individual, you should have them on and do some information for Roon? Like, how does that look?
It's kind of a mix. I mean, I think at the beginning when we were first starting, you can imagine it was just a lot of emailing and calling and saying, hey, do you want to be interviewed? But now it's actually flipped. People are coming to us saying, hey, we love what you're doing. We would love to come on the app and talk about our particular expertise. I want to have this for my own patients where I can share it with them. I think one of the powerful things we've learned is people want to hear from experts, but they also want to hear from their own doctors and, have more time with them, right? They want infinite time with their doctor, especially if your doctor is a good one, right?
I can't say that. Our neurosurgeon was absolutely amazing, but we had some hiccups with some others.
Yeah, exactly. So if you had a great doctor and you had all these questions from that initial, most people only have 15 to 20 minutes with their doctor where you're talking about some pretty heavy things. So how many topics or questions can you really get addressed? And so people see Roon as a place to really extend medical time and get all those questions that they didn't get answered, get information on those things. And then secondly, for the things that they did discuss, it's very often the case that people misremember or don't remember half of what we tell patients in the office. And so this is a way of supplementing that clinical learning that goes on in the office. So just to answer your question, nowadays, we just have a lot of incoming. People want to contribute and build on this ecosystem because they don't want to, as Vikram said, go on to TikTok or Instagram or Twitter to shout into the ether where it gets immediately lost. Here, they can talk to people who are really craving this information on a regular basis.
It's interesting, too, because what I have found with the platform is that it also helps patients and caregivers, those that are outside of the medical expert arena, find answers to questions that they didn't even know they should be asking.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's vitally important because there are times, especially when you're getting so much information thrown at you and you're sitting there and you're trying to digest everything that you're hearing. Even if you're an amazing advocate or you know how to navigate the health arena like Mike and I did when he was first diagnosed, it's still so much information and you don't always know exactly what questions you're supposed to be asking. Roon seems to have done a really good job of really pinpointing every corner so that caregivers and patients and families can go in and they're like, oh my God, I didn't even think to be asking this question. And I've got the answer to it.
I love that you said that. We always joke internally that having a new condition is like learning Latin and you're like falling off a cliff.
Yeah.
Not only are you in this extremely anxious stage, but you have to like navigate this new body of knowledge. And so a big part of Roon is actually this like teaching people what you should know. It's like the things you don't know, you don't know.
Hmm.
And we're using, a lot of really interesting latest technology and AI to look at kind of the semantic connection between a sentence and related sentences. So, if someone says like, how do I choose a neuro-oncologist? We might say, okay, you should also be thinking about a radiation oncologist and the related questions around that. We do a lot of like, if you ask X, you should also be thinking of Y.
Hmm.
And we use sort of AI to power that. And it's been really helpful. That's why people actually learn a lot by learning the questions they should be asking. Many of the questions also are not medical.
Hmm.
I think it's really important to stress how many of our creators are actually people with kind of encyclopedic knowledge from lived experiences. We have some incredible people on the platform like Adam Hayden, who's just been a huge advocate.
Yep. He follows our show.
His questions will be very different than what Rohan or a neuro-oncologist says, right?
Hmm.
The experience of radiation, the experience of maybe communicating this really devastating diagnosis to your family. And so we really fuse the medical with kind of the lived experience. And I think that also makes this really special.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I know many individuals who have been through the lived experience and have been offering up that information. I myself have done a lot of different stories in the caregiver space on the platform. And it is extremely important to have those lived experience stories because you're looking through the glass from a different lens. It's a different POV.
Hmm.
It's a different point of view, and everybody's going to have that. And it's just continued teachable moments from so many different angles. And that's what life is supposed to be. It's not just this one narrow perspective. I mean, the only way that we're actually going to find ways to better treat ALS and brain cancer, to find better options, is to have multiple perspectives and different viewpoints. I mean, there's something a patient could say that could spark a medical expert that's working on a clinical trial. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The way that you guys have put this together and navigated this is extremely powerful. It's really poignant. Vikram, from your perspective, you come from a wholly different background than Rohan, really in the global marketing and development strategy and tech space, but you've also got lived experience. You had to walk through the caregiving aspect with your dad when he had ALS. So coming into this from that perspective, into this space where it's multiple different diseases, but from your background and your personal lived experience, how did being part of Roon, did it help you, especially after what you went through with your own dad? Did you find healing and learning in being part of this app?
I would say, for me, some of the themes that, so one is because I came from a classic Silicon Valley company, I couldn't shake the feeling that, as I mentioned earlier on the podcast, many of the brightest minds in technology and design and storytelling were kind of throwing themselves at what I call kind of fairly pedestrian problems, making it easier to shop, making it easier to do a home renovation project, things that were interesting, but it always was confusing to me. How could we get this group of people to really channel their energies, their intellectual capital to where people need it the most, right?
Mhm.
You're navigating a health crisis. You really need technology and design and storytelling to shine. Like I
Mhm.
would argue a GBM app should be 100x more empathetic, better designed than Uber or Airbnb or Pinterest or anything else, right?
Mhm.
Because you're much more forgiving if you're shopping, but if the stakes are that high. And so that was like a big part of what I was motivated by, which is, how do we channel people like myself, but really apply their smarts to this space? Because I did find, the healthcare media landscape to be really kind of stuck in the dark ages a little bit.
Mhm.
And then on the more empathetic, caregiver side, I'm an immigrant. My dad is from India. I think it was just the access issue was very acute. We come from an upper middle class family and we still struggled we spent 18 months trying to get the diagnosis.
Mhm.
In India, even today, there are no multidisciplinary clinics. There's no such thing as like seeing a speech pathologist and a genetic counselor and a, occupational therapist all in a center. And so as a family, we had to piecemeal all of the resources. And India's 1.4 billion people. And so for me, a big motivation coming at this was access
Mhm.
and how do we extend access and how to, in the United States, we have, even though people make fun of the healthcare system, there's an embarrassment of riches in terms of just, leading academic medical hospitals,
Yeah.
doing cutting edge research, and extending that internationally is a big focus, for me and how I came at this.
That's a good point to bring up, because I think that a lot of times with everything going on in our economic landscape in the US, I think we have a tendency to forget how blessed we really are with the healthcare system we have and the creative minds that are powering and thinking outside the box to find. I mean, we really do have an amazing healthcare space compared to other countries. I've got a lot of followers from India, and I've had at least 4 or 5 different families within the last year reach out from India because they had a brain cancer diagnosis, and there is just limited information and limited options that they have over there. And it breaks my heart because you can't get everybody over here.
Yeah.
You can't, I mean, how do you? And so I actually had a couple people, I said, there's this app, I'm hoping you can get more information. And it was Roon, because that was the only thing I could think of to pass off to people in other countries that can't get over here to access what they need in person.
Both on the science and care side, right? So much of science is actually about hope. And imagine living in a part of the world where you can't enroll in a clinical trial or you can't participate, let alone, the basics of care.
Just to build on that, I mean, one of the goals we have with Roon is to show the world what great looks like in terms of not just an app designed for health information, but what does great care look like?
Right.
You don't have to go as far away as India to find places that are healthcare deserts, places where people are not being offered clinical trials, where they're not getting offered even sometimes the standard of care. I mean, just recently I met with a family who frankly did not get the care that you're supposed to get in 2024 for a brain tumor. And they were just a couple hundred miles away from me. It's ridiculous that that should be the case in modern US healthcare. So with Roon, we're hoping to show people, what does great care look like? What questions should you be asking? How should you be advocating for yourself or your loved one so that you get the care that you deserve? Roon is our way of delivering that message.
Yeah, just to riff on that, the original name of the company was CareSpace, actually.
Yes, that's right.
The reason we called it CareSpace is we said, okay, the space between clinic visits, and that's the space that really matters. You're sitting at home, you're alone, your friends don't understand what you're navigating. Maybe you don't have the resources, and that's the space we want to occupy.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we make sure people feel supported, comforted, held, informed in all of that time outside of a doctor's appointment?
The in-between.
Yeah.
The in-between turns out to be 99% of the experience of health.
Yeah, and that time is brutal, to be honest. It's a brutal place to be. Rohan, I want to follow up with you real quick, because as we're talking about this and talking about navigating information and advocacy, as a neurosurgeon and somebody who's devoted your career to brain tumors and brain cancer, how has getting involved with Roon helped you as a neurosurgeon? What have been your takeaways? What have you learned from being part of this process as a neurosurgeon?
Big question. I think so many things. I've learned about the power of information to empower, individuals. I think we take for granted that we have easy access to information in 2024. Go to Google, just go online, type in something, go to Instagram, type in something, and you get an immediate set of results that you can kind of dive into. And so it's not the question of having access to information per se, but how can information empower you in whatever challenge you're facing? We're devoted to health and disease. And so what we found, as we talked about earlier, was that when you're trying to go navigate a particular illness, the informational journey is so bad in 2023, 2024, that people are actively hurt by the information that they receive online. Just some statistics, 4 out of 10 of us, if not more, are exposed to medical misinformation. And 75% of us can't even distinguish truth from lies when it comes to medical information.
That's scary.
And that's not because we're dumb. It's just because people are really good at seeming like they're experts and delivering information that may seem plausible, especially if you're not immersed in the healthcare landscape to begin with. What we've seen is that if we can give people the right information, their whole journey can be much, much different in terms of how they advocate for themselves, how they, are able to experience the journey of health. Just a quick example, we had a family that reached out to us last year and they said, hey, they wanted to tell us the story about how they had fluid leaking from their wound after a craniotomy. They didn't want to bother their surgeon, number one, just because they felt bad. And two, they felt like, I'm always on hold. Why bother calling the office? Fluid leaking from a wound is a bad thing. You should never do that because you can get meningitis, get an infection. And so on the app, they went to the Roon app and they searched for this and found that this is a bad scenario. This is a bad situation. And they quickly saw that, you can't let fluid be leaking from the wound. So they went to the emergency room and got it fixed. Disaster averted. The alternative is you don't get it fixed and you get a brain infection.
Right.
And so I think that's just a very concrete example of how people have used the app to really help their care. There's other situations where, you have sibling conflict around how to manage a loved one's healthcare situation, right? I'm sure many families can kind of identify with this situation. Yeah. And so on the app, for example, we have mental health experts and social workers who talk about how do you navigate that situation where family members or siblings are fighting around, making a healthcare decision.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you deal with that situation structurally? How do you deal with that situation emotionally? And so it's just a long way of saying that information is very empowering if you get the right information.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been a huge lesson. The other lesson, I think, which has been really interesting to see, is just how much of a correlation there is between medical experts who are great communicators and great clinicians.
Mm.
When you're interacting with a clinician in the office and they're able to explain things to you in a way that's easy to understand, really gets at the specifics. They're not vague and hand wavy, but really give you the specifics around your condition, your treatment, and your diagnosis. That is the best proxy we have as patients, as consumers, to know that this person knows what they're talking about. We can't go watch a neurosurgeon operate 10 times to say, okay, I'm comfortable with this person.
Right. You don't have that kind of time.
You don't have that time. Maybe you have word of mouth, but even word of mouth in a healthcare setting is challenging. What you're left with is that doctor-patient interaction. And how good doctors are at that interaction, I think, is a real bellwether for how good they are in terms of being your doctor down the road. So I think that's been a real important lesson as well.
This is a great segue into the next question I wanted to ask. And I'll shoot this to both of you, whoever wants to answer. As you talk about like a bellwether and you talk about, Roon being the space for that, do you see Roon as an incubator, so to speak, for clinical trials, for research and disseminating that information about clinical trials that are recruiting, or for the principal investigators to be using Roon as a way to disseminate and get out information?
Oh, I love that question. So yes, absolutely. We're already doing that. If you go to Roon today, you'll see information about certain clinical trials that are running, like the MVAX trial or the CGAT trial. Anyone that's encountered or gone through a clinical trial enrollment process knows that it's an incredibly arduous, paperwork intensive situation. And so it's one of those scenarios that really benefits from breaking it down. What is this clinical trial? What is the rationale behind this clinical trial? What are the risks and benefits around this clinical trial? Where you can really, through digestible information, really understand what's going on. Because in your hour again, or 30 minutes where you're discussing this in the office, it's just too much to be able to fully understand an informed consent form for anyone that's seen one of those.
Right.
And so this really allows PIs at hospitals to explain a clinical trial, and give it the time and space that it needs in terms that anyone can understand, and use that to help spread the word. Only 1% of eligible patients in the US ever sign up for a clinical trial. And part of that is just awareness.
Yeah.
Part of that is fear. And I think it's so unfortunate because clinical trials are the way that we're going to move the field forward. Any disease needs clinical trials to be able to get new treatments off the ground and even find a cure.
Yeah.
So the more people that participate, the faster we get towards better treatments. And so I think that's a really, really important place where Roon can provide value.
I see Roon as a great way to be a stopgap for not having information. Well, I do think a lot of it is fear. I also think that I was talking to another neurosurgeon, Dr. Bukvar, and he'd asked this question, how can we get more information about clinical trials in patients' hands? And I said, honestly, it really starts with the neurosurgeon. It starts with the boots on the ground that are working directly with the patients. And if that's not happening, where else are we going to go? Well, I see Roon as that place where the PIs can disseminate this information. And this is a great way to tell patients that, hey, we're recruiting. We have this clinical trial going on. And I see it as a stopgap so that we can really close that gap on not having information at the moment that you need it. Because I know personally that there were 2 clinical trials that Mike missed because we didn't know about them. And by the time one of them we found out about 3 days after it closed.
I mean, it's heartbreaking, right, to hear those kinds of stories. The other piece of clinical trials is that if you enroll in a clinical trial, I think it's really important to point out, there's studies shown that even if you get the placebo in a clinical trial, you do better than if you didn't enroll in the clinical trial. right? And I think that's
Yes.
it's
Yep.
related to maybe it's the placebo effect, maybe it's the fact that you're being so intensively monitored during the clinical trial. So I think there's huge benefits to participation, and I think more and more people should avail themselves of it.
I've said that many times on the show, on social. I've said that I've had a couple patients because we get a lot of patients that reach out and are just looking for help
Mhm.
in getting to the right places. I've done some patient advocacy work, and I've said to patients, because they've said, but what happens if I don't? If we end up with the placebo and it's just going to be worse? That is very crucial for people to know, is that there are studies, there is research to show, there's efficacy to really show that there is still benefit, even if you're not getting the actual drug. And it depends on the phase of the trial that you're into. But I can't stress that enough. And I'm glad that you pointed that out.
And one thing to add there, Shannon, there's sort of two levels to this. There's like the specific trials themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Rohan's done answers to a question like, what is the IMVAX trial? But then there's also just like the broader clinical trial navigation.
Yeah.
And so we have just a lot of people are just so confused. We have questions about, what is expanded. I didn't know what EAPs were before I entered this. And so we're
Yeah.
doing it at we want to be the place where latest trial information is found, but also that evergreen knowledge base of how do I navigate, what is an expanded access program.
Basically the ABCs.
The ABCs, which are itself quite cryptic and quite hard to like wrap your mind around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like what does phase one mean? Like
Yep.
most people don't know this.
Luckily, I had some knowledge ahead of it based on previous work that I had done. So that helped me because I knew what was what, and based on my science background. And I was able to navigate the ABCs of clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
It was still extremely difficult.
Oh, it's still very complicated.
It's very complicated. I'd love to ask both of you, and Vikram, I'll start with you. Where would you like to see Roon 3 years from now?
A big question. I think one is, Rohan and I have really found that this model of expert and lived experience answers in a highly medically vetted, safe, trusted platform is really something that people love and enjoy and find a lot of value. And so I think the goal is to do this really for all of health and disease.
Mm-hmm.
After launching ALS, which was near and dear to my heart, and glioblastoma, we launched Roon for dementia. And we're also seeing, same themes, right, that we mentioned, which is access to information,
Mm-hmm.
learning, feeling less alone. And so our 3-year goal is to do this for hundreds of conditions that are hard and have the same dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
We talk a lot about this. It's not an information problem anymore. It's really about assistance. Rohan and I talk about this like, hey, we're now in the age of assistance, not just age of information. We've transcended the information access problem. And so we want to really make the service feel like a guide. It's someone hand-holding you through the journey. That's a tall order because most internet services are, here, come and read this and buy.
Mm-hmm.
So we're using AI, using technology. How do we really make this feel like a guide? And so we use the word guide a lot, guided, because what we feel people want the most is the feeling of someone has my back along the journey. Doing this for more conditions and making the app feel even more guided are the big North Stars for us.
I mean, couldn't agree more. I think this idea of not just informing you, but empowering and assisting you in your healthcare journey is, where we want to head as a organization.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much we can do there, and it's really exciting. I mean, you just think of just some practical things. If you want to book an appointment with a neurologist for a migraine, that's at least a 6 to 9 month wait.
Right.
These are insane statistics.
Yeah.
And then when you get there, they'll tell you, maybe think about a headache diary and some other things.
You're like, I waited 6 months for this.
Exactly. Well, Roon can tell you that today.
Yeah.
If you go there. So I think the point is that we can really accelerate medical time for patients,
Mm-hmm.
get them further along in their healthcare journey, and really assist them through every stage of this. I mean, one of the things that we learned is also this idea of sharing knowledge. There's all this information in the dementia space to make sure that people can take baths safely
Mm-hmm.
and not fall, right? Falling can be a big issue
Right.
For people who are dealing with dementia. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's these things you can put in the bathroom called grab bars.
Yep.
And this is talked about a lot in dementia communities.
Mm-hmm.
But in GBM communities, this is not necessarily something that people talk about that frequently.
I was just going to say that's kind of a crisscross because that is something that's an issue in GBM spaces as well.
Yeah, yeah. And so we can disseminate that, people can learn from each other, right? And I think this
Mm-hmm.
idea of assisting you, helping you understand what you need, when you need it, and allowing you to get those things when you need it is a core function of Roon.
What I like about what you guys are talking about and opening this up to more diseases in the next few years, you guys really seem to be pinpointing, like Vikram had said, diseases that have similar dynamics. And these are all very hard to treat, uncurable diseases that where the information is even more complicated than don't get me wrong when I say this. Breast cancer is not an easy diagnosis, but the information within the breast cancer community is not only vast, but it seems to be a lot easier to digest and navigate than some of these other diseases. Not that it's not a brutal diagnosis to be given, but I like that you guys are putting emphasis on, at least in the beginning, some of these harder to treat diseases where the information is just complicated from the onset.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the tragedy of this space is there's no such thing as a easy health condition.
Right.
Initially, we started off with this idea of like, oh, we'll do the really hard ones first. But I think for someone experiencing, even, we're beginning to think about family building and fertility,
Mm-hmm.
navigating 3 IVF cycles is an insane amount of time, money, energy, medical system.
It's also painful. I've been down that road, so yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy to us, like as we enter new conditions, we realize that many of the same themes are true. In just, I'll give you an example, in fertility care, like there's 1,200 reproductive endocrinologists. And imagine the number of people navigating fertility. And then that really small base of people, an appointment is, 8 to 12 months with an REI.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think to your earlier point, we definitely work on conditions that have hard, complex access issues. But what we're learning is that it's like the universal human experience, and it's even bigger. Even conditions that seem easy are just so devastatingly hard to manage.
Well, it's like a spider web. You start out with the most complicated, but the further in you get, the more intricate you see these webs just kind of filtering into all different kinds of spaces. They seem to just spider web out and affect and reach a lot of different diseases and complications in the human experience.
Yep.
None of it's easy.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're diagnosed with whatever it is, it's the worst day of your life. Doesn't matter if someone else is dealing with cancer or whatever somebody else is dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
If you're dealing with any particular health situation, that anxiety meter goes through the roof. We want to respect that regardless of the condition that we tackle.
Let's talk to people a little bit about the app itself. For those who are looking to get on the app, is the app free to people to join? How do they access it? What would be the steps that they would take? Do they have to sign up, give an email? Do they have to download the app? Just kind of walk us through what that looks like for people.
Today, you go to roon.com and you can find information about the app. You can access it on the web, on your mobile phone through the web, and then also through the Apple iOS store. You can download the app from there. The app is free. We do ask you to sign up so we can personalize the content for you.
Mm-hmm.
That can give you the best possible experience. So it's a free resource for anyone that needs it.
You guys also have social media platforms. So you have other ways of getting this information out to people or smaller bites of information and then navigating people to the app. So what are some of the social media platforms that you guys are available on if people wanted to follow you guys?
We're early in our journey, and so our social media platforms are really about taking highlights from the app and so you can follow us on roon.gbm for anyone listening navigating glioblastoma, roon.als, and roon.dementia. And this is Instagram. But I would say that the core app is probably the best if anyone listening, download the app. And as Rohan said, if you open up the app, you'll see we have a space called Home where you can get recommendations for questions. And then we have this really extensive topical map of all the questions you should be asking and learning about, organized in a very simple way. And then we showcase all the experts. I know, Shannon, you're on the app yourself. If you like, let's say Shannon, or you like Rohan and you want to hear more from them, you can follow experts and see all the answers to their questions. We also have a pretty powerful search function.
Yes, you do.
We want to be the best version of a search engine where all of the content is from experts. So you can search whether it's sleep or pain or even the emotional side.
Mm-hmm.
You can type in the word anxiety, and we work with, in GBM psycho-oncologists who will give you information about navigating the emotional side.
One thing, Shannon, just to add is that we are constantly learning from our users. We do user interviews really every week,
Mm-hmm.
and we keep changing the app and improving it. So, we tend to release new updates to the app every 2 weeks
Okay.
to make it better and better. And we have some exciting improvements and new features rolling out over the next few weeks related to search, better personalization, et cetera. So really exciting stuff coming down in the short term for everyone to experience.
And that's really important for everybody. We all know user experience is everything. So it's a beautiful app. It is very easy to navigate. You're able to pull up whatever you need very quickly in search. And the way things are compartmentalized, the way things are grouped together, it's very clean, it's very concise, it's very organized. I absolutely love the way that it functions. And there are an array of different topics within those three disease elements. There's mental health topics. There are themes about emotional health and wellness. There are, holistic and eating wellness topics and diet and nutrition. The list goes on. And I love that you dive into each dark corner and complexity within the disease space, because there are just so many different avenues that affect each. And some of them cross over, they overlap. Some of the topics and issues that affect GBM are also issues and topics that affect somebody that's walking through like dementia and ALS. So for everybody who's listening, it is a great app to harness. There are so many individuals out there that are affected and touched by all three of these diseases. And like our guests have said, it's expanding. So they will be adding to this as we go. It's just forever going to be growing. And I love that too. You guys bring so much hope to this space, and it's an innovative way to really get out information and to help teach people advocacy. And I'm very grateful for it. I'm grateful to having both of you on. Again, if you want to just let our listeners know where they can find you, what the website is. And I'm so grateful that you guys were able to join us and kickstart Brain Cancer Awareness Month with us.
Thank you so much. We've loved working with you through the process. We also love your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
And then the amazing content you created for Roon. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shannon, for having us. It's a pleasure. Thanks for all you do for the patients in the brain tumor community and beyond. I think these conversations and experiences you have with your listeners are exquisitely important, and we're happy to play a role in that. As you said, roon.com is where you can find, ROON, where you can find our app.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being on the show and for giving us such vital information today, and a gift. Honestly, it's a gift of hope to so many that are out there that are walking one of these journeys, and there's no greater gift than that. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today. And with that, everybody, we will be right back. Roon is your trusted guide for navigating GBM. Roon contains over 2,000 answers to GBM-related questions from more than 100 resources, including top doctors, caregivers, nonprofits, and people living with the disease. And it's all for free. Our doctors come from Memorial Sloan Kettering, UCSF, UCLA, Weill Cornell, and other top institutions across the country. The web and app-based platform covers a comprehensive range of topics, everything from clinical trials to symptoms to surveillance and holistic medicine. Get all of your GBM questions answered for free from the world's top experts, now at Roon.com. Roon, your trusted guide for navigating GBM. My life has forever been altered because of glioblastoma. It became my greatest fear, a fear I didn't even know existed. So many lives are affected by this disease, yet all of us are determined more than ever to rise above it. We are what we grow beyond. We are resilient, hopeful. We move beyond our fear of this disease. And it's a ripple effect that spreads throughout every corner of the world, to the doctors, the oncologists, the radiologists, the neurosurgeons, the politicians. It's our hope, our fight in better treatments that show everyone that we can move beyond standard of care, that we must. We need to fund more innovative cancer treatments. The more patients that live longer, the more we show them that it's possible. We are what we grow beyond. Funding cannot be an issue that's up for debate. When thousands of lives are on the line, that excuse doesn't cut it. We need to keep advocating for the moonshot programs and to fight for legislation to keep moonshot funding for brain cancer research going. We need help. We need hope. We need each other. This is the importance of Brain Cancer Awareness Month and its message that resounds for 4 straight weeks. We don't just go gray. We glow. We glow with 1,000 golden strands of light that emanate through all of us, through each of our brains, through all of our neurons, through all of us. This is the hope and the message of brain cancer awareness. This is the hope of Roon, of programs like the Outlier Fund, Fierce Foundation, Stash Strong, Slay Foundation, Brain Tumor Charity of UK, Brain Tumor Foundation of Canada, Moonshot Funding, Cure Brain Cancer, Our Brain Bank, Broach Foundation, and the Game On Glio podcast, and so many more. We are not our fear. We are not our funding or money that drives this. We are hope. We are light. We are love. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. We have another special episode later this month. Until then, may grace, guidance, and gratitude light your way. You've been listening to the Game On Glio podcast, the podcast that is designed to educate, advocate, and tell the real stories of those walking the journey of brain cancers such as glioblastoma and grief and loss. Like what you hear? Share us with others. Follow us on Instagram at Game On Glio Podcast, Facebook at Game On Glio, or visit our website or YouTube channel. You can find us anywhere podcasts are played.